Now that I have the cutting edges hard faced on the bucket, next thing I want to tackle here is on the thumb. So if you look, it could be a little bit longer. It's worn down pretty bad, and then looks like it was patched here. Maybe a longer piece was put on. That's all completely worn off. So it would be nice to have that come down to at least an inch or two of overlap with the bucket for grabbing things. And I do want to keep the spacing right to go in between the teeth. So ideally I'm going to stay right in the profile of the original tooth of the thumb. That'll go right in there. These patches are a little bit on the wide side. So I'm going to start looking into this. I don't know if I can cut this off a little bit and then add a piece on. I don't need much, but it would just be nice if it would overlap into there. I was gonna wait and see what I got for different buckets, what tooth spacing was on those, try to plan it out accordingly. But if I get a 3-foot bucket, that's gonna be for digging. This bucket is just kind of a beater bucket. This would most likely, I guess, be what I'd use for when using the thumb, cleaning trees and rocks and that. And if I do end up getting something narrower, you know, if I go with an 18 or a 12 inch or something, that's going to be narrower than the thumb, so that won't really matter at that point. So I might as well just try to make this work better the way it is. Trying to just make something out of paper template, figure out what I'm looking at here. If I could make them 7 inches long, ideally I'd make them longer, but got limited material here. If I make them 7 inches longer and line it up there, I would have about half of it overlapping, so I could weld both sides for about 3.5 inches. And it'd stick about 3.5 inches past. And then I could cut out those top corners just so they aren't catching on things. But now I gotta figure out how to get 2 of those pieces out of this. I don't want to use both drawbars. This one's harder material, you can tell if you listen. But I'm going to use this little bit softer stuff. It's still going to be pretty hard. And then, but I would like to get them both out of here. If I could shorten them up a little bit, they'd both come out of here. But if I make them too short, I won't have enough to weld on. So I'm trying to figure out how I could cheat one side or the other to try to make one in between the holes. Maybe have a little bit of a hole on the cutout. The main thing for the length up on this end is just to have more to weld to, so it doesn't need to be overly thick right here. I just want to have plenty of area to weld to and get a good joint there. So I'm gonna mess around with seeing how I can try to get them both cut out of one piece, and hopefully we can figure something out. I think I have it figured out. I am going to make one piece right here, just cut it at an angle down along there, and then the other one will be like that, and there'll just be a little nick out of the corner for that hole. So I think first I'm going to try to cut this at an angle there with the angle grinder and a cutoff wheel. Probably going to be the best option I have, and then I can chop it here and there on the chop saw, and then probably have to come with the angle grinder at the cutoff wheel and put those angles on it. So I will get started at that. Well, that worked as good as I could have expected. Got a, it's not perfectly on the line or perfectly straight, but for what this is going to be, perfect isn't necessary. So I actually cut through fairly easily. Didn't use much of the cutoff wheel at all. So I'm gonna maybe put the grinder back on and at least dress up those edges so that while I'm working with it, they aren't razor sharp. And then really not too warm. I'm sure it'll soak in a little bit, but now with that done, I can at least kind of look at how it's going to look on the machine, and then I should be able to lop them off to length, if nothing else. And then I think maybe what I'll do is cut one off to length, put it on there, tack it in place, and then cycle it down, see how it looks before I get too far along into it. And then if it looks decent, I can get the other one cut to length, tack it on. That second chamfer I'm going to cut off there, that I could do once it's welded on. Really wouldn't be any harder when it's on the machine. And that way, like I said, I can kind of make sure that everything lines up and looks good and is going to work before I spend a lot of time cutting and making the pieces. So, well, we'll see how it goes. I was a little surprised this actually cut a lot easier, or a bit easier, using the angle grinder and the cutoff wheel. I thought it would cut fairly decent on the cutoff saw after I had good luck cutting it with the angle grinder, but I think because I was trying to cut the whole width all at once, it just kind of settled in there and made heat. Instead of trying to cut it with the angle grinder, I could just kind of work my way up and down on the cut and always just be having a small point of contact. But either way, got it hacked off. I'm gonna dress it up a little bit and then put it on there, tack it on there, and see how it looks. I have it cut to length. Put a little chamfer on it where it needs it. I'm going to try to hold it. I can't really clamp it in position because there's nothing square or straight about it. So I'm going to just hold it where I pretty much figure it needs to be. Try to get somewhat of a decent tack on it so it at least holds on. Then I can measure everything. If it looks good, I can tack it on a little better. Then I can start the machine up and cycle it and make sure it's in the right spot. After I cycled it, it would work. It's just catching the bucket edge by 1/4 inch or so, and the inside of the tooth hits the outside of the bucket tooth, so it would work. I would feel a lot more comfortable if I could move it down at least a 1/4 inch, a heavy 1/4 inch. And also this, where this one's going to line up in the tooth, it's going to be a lot more forgiving. This one, it is in a little bit, and then it's got this hook from where the drawbar was bent down, so I may pop this guy off and save it for on this side, but I'll need to dress this up before I can put it on there. I may cut that other piece and put it on here, and then when I do that, set it down 3/8 of an inch or so longer. I'd hate to go through all this trouble and after I use it a little bit be a little bit short. I cut out the other piece. This one is straight, doesn't have that curve on the end, and then I tacked it on there a little bit farther out and just checked it, and that is gonna look good. So I'm gonna go ahead and burn this one on, and then when I get done with that, then I gotta grind some of this weld off and make a flat surface and grind some of this wear off like what I did on the other side, then get that other piece laid in there and weld that one on. And then yeah, hopefully if I weld that good and then put you know, a number of passes on there, that'll be good. And then I can come around here, weld that. I got a little bit of 3-dimensional by coming up the side here. Hopefully that gives it a little bit of stability from twisting. But it also shouldn't really want to twist because it's behind here, so with the pressure on it, it should really mainly be trying to pop off. So hopefully I can get it welded on. If I have to, I can always put a plate over there. You know, maybe I'll weld that and get it ground flat again, and then cut out a plate to put in there to hold that together a little bit better. But we will see how it goes. This one is pretty much all welded on. Got quite a few passes here. Same with here, built it all up, filled it in. Got it good. The one thing I have to do yet on this one is up underneath that, but rather than trying to weld overhead or do anything silly, I will just wait until I get both of them welded on. Then I will reposition the machine and weld that in a more comfortable position. The reason I'm not moving the machine around a lot now is every time I weld, I disconnect the battery. So rather than switching that back and forth, I'm just trying to do as much as I can at once. I have both of these teeth welded on here now. So this one I still have to cut a little bit off there. Wouldn't necessarily have to do it, but it would just make it look a little better. Maybe get caught on a few less things. But I've got them welded on the 3 sides. So So I think what I'm going to do is raise the thumb up and over and then get at it and weld the piece that's underneath there. Once I have that welded, then they'll be welded completely on, and then I can go ahead and cut that piece off, and then we should be good to go. So I'm gonna try to get this in a position to weld from underneath there, and then we'll get that cut off. Just got it propped open now so that the grinder doesn't get into the teeth here. So I'm gonna make a mark on there. Hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to cut it straight. All right, I think that's how she's gonna be then. I could clean it up a little bit and paint it. Maybe I will, but I also kind of like things being shiny out on the end of the bucket and that, because that way when you're in brush, you know, if I paint it black, you really can't see it when you're doing work with it. Whereas if it's just shiny, then it kind of shines through the brush or logs, whatever you're trying to grab with it. So I think it's a success. I put some pressure on it with the bucket, and they didn't pop off. One thing I did do while I was welding, I don't know if you can see, is I put a little hard face, or I just used the 7018, but went down, around, and back up, so the edge and tip have a little bit of weld on them. Maybe that'll help with the wear, make them last a little bit longer. But it looks like it should work. Lines up, meshes in there just the way I was hoping it would. Now it's just a matter of whether they break off or not. But all right, well, thanks for tagging along.